Hello and welcome to Monday's Total Soccer Show. I am Daryl Grove and I'm joined by a mathematical genius. It's Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting a man who will now have to have a playoff to get on the podcast.
So, as we were about to record this, we saw the news that Infantino, new FIFA president, is proposing the World Cup be expanded to 48 teams.
Right.
And Taylor Rockwell got to the chalkboard and worked out how exactly all that would work in a tournament.
Well, because the biggest thing is that basically it would be 48 teams, but those 16 new teams would play 16 of the teams that already qualified in a one-off playoff to make it into the group stage?
Yeah, so you would end up with a group stage of 32 teams as we have now.
Right.
But yes, 16 of the teams in that group stage would already be sort of protected and in there, and then 32 teams would play off against each other in a sort of single elimination game to enter that round of 32. It sort of sounds more complicated than it is. I think once you see it in a bracket, it's basically a play-in round, right? There'll be
a massive play-in round.
Massive play-in round with
defeats
32
the purpose
teams.
of it being a play-in. Yes.
Yes. Okay, so we have to talk about this, right? This is something that could come in for the, I would guess, 2022 World Cup, because they're looking at sort of rubber stamping it in 2017, so it wouldn't be time for the Russia World Cup. Yeah, that's Infantino's.
Because if there's one thing we know about FIFA, the wheels turn quickly.
Well, I think when expanding a big money-making machine is involved, the wheels probably do turn quickly. When it's
do you want to make more money or less money?
If it's having anti-racism meetings, the wheels turn a little more slowly.
Or they don't turn at all.
Yeah, I mean, so slowly that they stop.
Right.
So there's so much more to talk about on today's show. There's Bob Bradley being hired at Swansea City. We saw Spurs Man City. We saw Pulisic playing for Borussia Dortmund. There's a new US roster. There's all kinds going on. But let's start with this World Cup stuff, Taylor.
Yes.
Thumbs up or thumbs down on a 48-team World Cup with a play-in round?
I'll take you through it, because for me it started with, and then it went to hate, and now I'm at strong dislike.
It was kind of an honour to be in the room for the Taylor emotional and mental roller coaster of the reaction to this.
Well, it was just sort of, at first it's like, oh, change is good. I did enjoy the new Euro format, even if it did mean like slightly duller group stage games.
But go Wales.
But exactly. And for many different reasons, as we'll discuss in a moment. But then, and so the idea of more teams, and then the way you pitched it was like, well, it's basically just the playoffs we already have being played at the tournament.
Which is sort of true, right?
It's sort of true, except that it's not, because what you have 3 playoffs, maybe 2 playoffs, I forget how many it is, but it's not that many. It's certainly not 16. And so basically what that would mean then is that you make automatic qualification for the group stage much more difficult. Like, I think, if you go by the math that I was trying to do, it means that...
There is a chalkboard of crazy numbers behind Taylor.
It means that maybe, for example...
disrespect.
I know, it's cool. It's definitely a little bit scratched out, including the part where I wrote Oceania and then just immediately crossed it out, because there's no chance they're getting an automatic bid. They already don't, so that makes sense. But like, if you're looking at CONCACAF, for example, I think maybe in the best case scenario, you get 2 automatic qualification spots in the new format. More likely, it's 1.
We're speculating, right?
Yeah, I mean, but if you stick with kind of the format as it is, it's basically, I think my math was like, UEFA 8, AFC 1, Common Bowl 3, Africa 3 or maybe 2, and then CONCACAF 1 or maybe 2.
Because what you would end up with is essentially there would be a protected 16 who are the teams that qualify and are definitely already in the group stage, and then the other 32 teams would be fighting it out to join them. So during World Cup qualifying, there would be this thing where you would need to, like, for example, probably in the Hex, which the US is about to go into, finishing second or third right now, it's fine, right? You still go to the World Cup. But if you've finished first and you're in the Sweet 16, as I guess it will inevitably be called in the US, but if you finish second or third and you're in the sort of the play-in 32, then you've got to finish top. It makes the Hex more exciting.
That's the thing.
That's the pro case for it.
I think it makes, there's many pro cases, because you're right. It makes all of World Cup qualifying that much more fascinating. Because now it's not, 3 of the teams are going to make it, and so, just be in the top 3. Now it's like every single game matters, every point matters, much more than it already does. I think it also means that you get, just numerically, you get 48 teams going to the World Cup. That means you're going to get more countries interested. You're going to get more countries staying interested. I just don't like it for a number of reasons, but one of which is, and we're going to talk about Bob Bradley in a little bit, obviously, but go back to when he managed Egypt, and they had a great run through every single group stage of qualification for Africa.
Almost all the way.
But the way African qualifying works is that then you have a playoff, and that playoff was against a very strong Ghana team who obliterated them in the first round and the first fixture, and that's it. It's one game and you're done. And
Well, it was 2 legs, but they got so badly beat in the first leg that it was over.
No, but that's my point, is that when you get so badly beat in the first leg, it's one game. Like, there's no chance. I think it was, 5-0 or 5-1? you're not really going to come back from that.
Yeah.
And so with the playoff round, I guess speaking as like a U.S. fan, for example, and I made this joke before we started recording that like I know our luck, and it would be sort of like in the available teams that the U.S. could draw would be like the worst team in or like the worst team in Common Bowl, the worst team in UEFA, the worst team in Asia, and then also Germany, and we would get Germany. Like that's and so I think it would just be a bummer to have 2 years of qualifying and finish second in the Hex.
Yeah.
And then still have to do a playoff against a potentially strong team.
It would also be a bummer to get all pumped for the World Cup.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Then you've got this terrible playing game and you get beat and that's it. It's over. Like your World Cup could be over after 30 minutes if you make a bad start.
Right.
You know what I mean? Not that they would shoo you off the field, but you know what I mean? It could all be done. And there'd be all this built-up excitement. Normally you get at least 3 games and even if you get eliminated, you get to take something away from it. Unless you're England in 2014, I guess.
And this is me, and then maybe this is me being too much of like a boring old thinker in the sense of like not being a thinker, but just in the way my mentality might be. But like, I also think if you look at the way the group stage games went at this summer's Euros, that might be a good example of how these playoffs would go. That if you're a smaller team who just barely qualified and you're in a group with a bunch of stronger teams, but you know that you can qualify maybe if you just stay really defensive and don't let anything happen and take advantage of your one opportunity, I don't think it's going to make for very exciting games. It's going to make for very, man, we can't afford to lose this because we've come all the way to the World Cup and now we might get eliminated.
So they're playing games. Instead of like excitement and drama of a knockout first round, it would be more like the defending and caution of a knockout first round.
It reminds me of the idea of golden goal, which is like in theory it's so exciting because anybody can win at any moment.
Got the word gold in it.
But then it flips it around and becomes like, anyone can win at any moment, and so no one is going to try to do anything for fear that they'll get caught out. I could see these playoffs being the exact same way, and then the opening round to your World Cup that's supposed to be so exciting and innovative is like, oh, another 0-0 that went to penalties. Great, awesome, can't wait.
And Slovakia are through.
Yeah.
All right, so that was the new World Cup idea that just came out of Gianni Infantino this morning, just before we were going to hit record. Right?
If you don't mind my asking, though, I've given you my long-winded rant. I'm curious what your thoughts are, because I think you're a little more nuanced in your opinion than
I'm pro, because I think even with the disappointment of losing in the first round, I'm into the idea of as many teams as possible should get to have the excitement of a World Cup.
Right.
I mean, look at Wales. Like, I know that they did well in their qualifying groups. They would have made it anyway, I believe, to the Euros. But the expanded Euros meant more teams went to the Euros, right? So just the idea of having more people get some of that World Cup experience is a good thing for me. Because you talk about one country qualifies and that country could have 25 million people in it, then that's like, say, 70% of the country are into soccer.
Right.
Then that's suddenly a lot of people very excited instead of, oh, we got knocked out again. At least they get to go to the big dance.
Yeah. And I wish, and I guess I like that idea. I just wish it weren't so
maybe even
drastic.
Scotland.
Yeah, but I like maybe, and again, this is me doing math on the fly, which is a very dangerous thing for me to be doing.
I know. Well, we've got the Goodwill Hunting board over here. It's the it's the one where Goodwill Hunting tries to solve the thing, and the people are like, "You should stick to janitoring."
It's more like in 21 Jump Street when Channing Tatum, I think, has taken ecstasy and then is like solving math problems that he thinks he's solving, and then it's just like the number 4 written over and over and over again. That's more what my math style is. But I think I wish maybe it was just more like they expanded to 40, and then like you had some of the playoff games that you already have, the play-in games. Yeah, that like instead of like the last World Cup, it was Mexico, New Zealand. Like if you had that played just before the tournament started, then that makes a little more sense to me, and then you have a few teams that can have their play-in, and you expand the number.
Yeah.
So CONCACAF gets, instead of 3.5, we get 4.5.
Right.
And then you have that one other team that goes to the playoffs.
So you want us all to be like the frog in the slowly boiling water.
Yes, exactly.
So Taylor, today was a day of late-breaking news. I can tell you this because I recorded the inaugural Goalmouth podcast, which is now available on iTunes. It's our new collaboration with Dirty Tackle and Hello Magazine. It's all the breaking news that you get in the morning. Literally, we published Goalmouth at 7 a.m. with the time it has to be available by. That's what we've promised. Like 7:40, Swansea City announced that Francesco Guidolin has been fired and Bob Bradley is in.
And my question is, did I ruin your morning? Because I'm assuming that you saw that news via me texting you.
Yeah, a little bit. But, I mean, I think I came up with a solution. I basically recorded an extra segment and added breaking bonus news to Goalmouth. Because I'm thinking that's too big to not get that news, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So you kind of ruin my money, but it's also super good and exciting news for US fans, maybe not so much for Swansea fans.
Yeah, that's the way it seemed. Yeah.
An American coach in the Premier League. Bob Bradley is going to be coaching Swansea City. We're all pumped. Looking at message boards, Swansea fans not so pumped. So before we do the excited case for, let's maybe do the case against.
Well, from what I've read and what I've heard, it sounds like Swansea fans aren't against Bob Bradley. They're not like, who's this guy? We don't want this unnamed guy. We wanted,
with his piercing blue eyes.
Yeah, very much so. But it wasn't about like it wasn't about like we should have made another run for Brendan Rodgers or we should have made a run for this big name or that big name.
Yeah.
It was more about what sacking Gideon represents. And even though Swansea at this point have played 6, drawn 1, lost 5, the arguments that I've seen are basically that...
They've won 1 game, I think.
Okay, maybe it's 1-1.
They've played 7.
Okay,
it's in their last 6 games.
There it is.
Thank you. The last 5,
This is why you're here, buddy. You're right, because otherwise they'd be bottom of the table. Yep. Right now they're not in the relegation zone yet. But I think the argument was that statistically this was the hardest start that any team in the Premier League had. Now, some of that was based on like West Ham replicating their form from last season, which they're obviously not doing.
Yeah.
But it's still a really tough run of form. And it's a guy who basically was brought in January to right as much as you possibly can a sinking ship, which he did. And then there's the argument that like maybe you give him some time, let him settle, let him figure it out. Some of the signings have been really poor, and so you maybe give him a window to figure that out and see how things progress.
Ashley Williams was stole from under him, right? That's a key player for Swansea City.
Ashley Williams, who had to Google him to know who he was because people didn't really know who he was coming in.
Yeah.
And so like when that's your incoming manager, maybe it's worth giving him a little more time, especially if it seems like he has a grasp of the situation. That's, I think, the Swansea fan idea.
And is it to do with the new ownership group? That seems like, because they have been sort of, as I understand it, supporter trust owned. Like Hugh Jenkins was part of that original trust that sort of saved the club from disappearing. Became, I can't remember exactly what his position is, but he's basically been in charge for a long time.
Right.
Suddenly they get American investors, right? Isn't it? American investors essentially took over in just before the summer of 2016.
I think it was first like aggressively reported in May, and then the article that I read that was basically like this has happened was in July.
So I can see if I'm a Swansea fan, suddenly your new sort of are they the new ownership group or just the new investment group?
I think that they're the majority owners. I think they own 60% of the club.
There we go. All right, so the sports trust still involved, but they have the biggest say, right? The new owners. I keep calling them owners. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But suddenly they seem more trigger happy, right? It seems like they've come in and fired someone after 7 games and brought in an American. Right? Imagine if this was like a culture we're not as familiar with. Imagine if it's Japanese owners who come in, fire the coach, and bring in a Japanese coach who did well for Japan at the World Cup, but no one else has really heard of them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense, but I think like removing that from the equation for a second, I think you look at the way it went in terms of, I think Gideon was given a new contract in May when there were other names out there. And it sounds a little bit like maybe the new owners came in and they're like, yeah, you can have a new contract, or like we won't stand in the way of that. But let's make it a 2-year one, and let's make it so that as soon as something goes wrong, we can get rid of him and do what we want. That said, I mean, there had been conversations between Swansea and Bob Bradley before. I think before Gideon was hired. That was this time, right?
Going back.
Yeah, going back. He was a candidate in January when they were initially looking for a coach to replace Gary Monk. So it's not as though this is just kind of out of the blue. They've never heard his name before. It just sounds like maybe he didn't impress at the time, and now they're looking for another coach, and he is the bargain that maybe they want.
So let's talk about it then. Bob Bradley, American coach in the Premier League. Suddenly, all those fans who are like, don't know which Premier League team to support, this is your clear choice, right?
Yes.
Yeah?
I'm laughing because my wife, Margaret, said that made her really want to support Swansea now because she has Welsh lineage, as we've talked about on the show, and now they have an American coach, and she was like, but I really don't like him. And I was like, what? Why don't you like Bob Bradley? And then she proceeded to like, well, wasn't he the one who did this and did this and did this? And I was like, no, that's Klinsmann. And she was like, oh, okay, then never mind. I like him. Okay, they can be my team now. But it was just sort of like, really? I did not know my wife had such strong feelings towards Bob Bradley. And it was, she was absolutely remembering Klinsmann.
So how do we think he's going to fit in?
I don't really know is my answer to that question, which is the best I can do. I mean, basically the narrative has been that he's a manager who comes in and performs quote-unquote miracles on shoestring budgets. And that's the idea, is that he can try to get a result out of Swansea with the parts he already has and maybe signing a few players on a budget,
right,
or on free.
And none at all until January, right? He has October, November, December to go with what he's got, right?
Yeah, and from my limited experience interacting with Bob Bradley, which is to say that I've asked him like 2 questions and then been around him in press conferences.
We've both done press conferences, right.
I mean, he's a no-nonsense guy. I mean, which is not to the level of like Dwight Schrute, where he tracks how much nonsense has been had in a given day. But he's definitely a very serious manager. He definitely will joke around and have fun with the press and is very clever. Obviously, is Princeton educated. That kind of comes with the territory. So I think he will kind of immediately command that sort of authoritarian respect.
Will he, as an American coach, facing a bunch of sort of English and Welsh journalists who are maybe a little bit cynical about soccer? You know what I'm saying? There's going to be a little bit of that.
Yeah, I'm sure there will. And that's part of dealing with the British press, which he'll get used to very quickly. But it's not like he's never dealt with hostile press before, and he's certainly dealt with hostile situations before, again, going back to that time in Egypt.
Yeah.
So I think he'll be more than capable of handling the press.
Yeah.
The question will be, how capable will he be if results don't go his way quickly?
Yeah, because the thing is, we can all be excited about it, but the Premier League is kind of... You have a short leash, right? Yeah. If it's not working, out you go. New guy comes in.
I mean, they've already got like the bold font picture up, ready to go of like Yanks for nothing, right? Like that's good. Like if he gets fired, that's what it's going to be. Like they're already prepared for it, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah.
I'm surprised.
They being all of the English media.
I'm a little bit disturbed as to how quickly that came to me. But so I think so he's definitely going to get some of that stuff, and I think he'll be able to weather that. Because that's nothing. But when it comes time for why did you get beat 3-0 by Arsenal in your first game away?
Yeah.
Why haven't you won yet? Why is it this? What we've heard reports of dressing room unrest.
Yeah.
How do you handle that if those questions arise? That will be a big test for him, as will getting results.
I'm thinking of Bob Bradley's style of play as well, speaking of getting results. So Swansea, from what I understand, have a sort of history of a somewhat sort of aggressive game, right? Going back to Brendan Rodgers, he had that sort of pressing Liverpool, like high-tempo type game, and they continued that with Gary Monk. I'm not really sure...
And with Brian Laudrup in between.
Right? Sure. And I'm not really sure what Gideon's been doing, but I do know that they pressed Man City and had some success, and they lost 2-1 in the end. They pressed Man City recently, and that was kind of the beginning of the shakening of Man City. That I think they loosened the jar. They loosened the jar a bit for Celtic and Tottenham Hotspur, which we'll talk about later. But that's not Bob Bradley's game, is it? I remember Bob Bradley's United States was very much sort of defend and counter, run and gun, right? He would have famously a couple of holding defensive midfielders, but then attackers on the wings and up front. So that's how we beat Spain, right? Jay DeMerit heads it away all day. Then we go at the other end with Donovan and we score.
From what I have read of Bob Bradley and the limited amount that I have seen of him since he's left the United States, the other thing that I see consistently written is that he is a pragmatist, that he's basically capable, again, operating on a budget, is able to basically build his team with what he has.
Right, so you're saying it's not like I should say this is the Bob Bradley style.
Yeah,
it's not... He's
not flat 4-4-2 with 2 defensive midfielders, more attacking. Well, I guess not even flat 4-4-2, but you know what I mean. Like, it's not. This is what he has to do, otherwise it won't work.
He's not Bielsa, where he comes in and says, "This is how we play soccer." It's more he's going to come in and be like, "I think I have a plan that could work here."
That would be my guess. And again, by all accounts, he kind of blew them away in the interview, and so it sounds like maybe he has a definitive plan that made them happy. Now, whether or not it factored in that plan was delivered with an American accent. It remains to be seen. Yeah. And I think that probably is a big part of it, to be honest. I think it's an awareness that you get a huge market share in the United States with people being pumped that there's an American manager when there's never been one before.
All right. And you said first game away to Arsenal.
Yikes.
Obviously not this weekend because it's international week's coming up. So at least he's got time to get in there and prepare. But that is a big ask, right? Swansea away to Arsenal in your first game.
Yep. And we'll see. We'll see what happens.
One more thing I want to say about this. The current climate in English football is all about, oh no, it turns out we're all kinds of corrupt and we didn't even know it. And Tommy Wright's taking £5,000 bungs and there's all that. My understanding of Bob Bradley is that he is an ethical, honest man. And I feel like if anything, he's at least a bit of a bright light in sort of a murky world right now.
Not to keep riding that horse, but like, he was offered to have his contract made null when the situation in Egypt erupted, and he chose to stay there. I don't think he lived there, but I think he lived in the Middle East and commuted, or maybe it was in Italy and commuted. But he basically, he chose to stay with that team, and even when the Port Said, I believe it was, the stadium disaster happened, he was there marching. He was part of the. So I think he is shown that he can kind of prove...
And not in a photo opportunity kind of way, right?
No, not
More in
at
a,
all.
like, I'm doing this much kind of way.
Yeah.
Solidarity.
Yeah. So I think he's proven himself to be an upstanding individual. And yeah, maybe there will be some of that he kind of brings a steady hand to an unsteady English FA.
Well, there'll be no Bob Bradley scandal, is what I'm saying.
Let's hope not.
At the very least.
Let's hope
All right,
not.
but we're going to be watching Arsenal v Swansea in the near future.
Yeah,
with our fingers crossed.
We
kind
will.
of. Sorry, Arsenal fans.
I know we've gone on this a lot, but one thing
big news.
It is, but I want to get this in there too. That I do think, like, you're going to hear, and our Football Ramble, they're our friends. Luke Moore, I've stayed with him when we were visiting London. You're going to hear jokes about, like, he's a proper hard man. Like, you can just tell, right? Like, because I feel like a lot of pundits in England, or like a lot of commentators love to joke about, like, who would win in a fight, like which manager would be the scrappiest manager.
Yeah.
Bob Bradley looks scary. and I bet you're going to hear a lot of comments on, like, I wouldn't mess with him. I wouldn't go on a toe with him. Yep.
Piercing blue eyes, big stare.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of, guy who looks like him a lot, Michael Bradley. I've heard they might be related.
Yeah, I think so.
Rumours already starting up that maybe, and rumours by fans, not rumours from
exactly.
the
I was going to say. Yeah.
Speculation starting up that maybe Michael Bradley is a future Swansea signing if things work out for Bob Bradley.
I mean, that is
how realistic is that?
That is why he played at Starbuck and Le Havre, right?
Yes, but that wouldn't have necessarily been such like a siren call as the Premier League, right?
Yeah.
The Premier League. In Bradley's, like Michael Bradley's like 28, 29 now. This would be his last chance to go and do it. I know he played once or twice for Aston Villa, but it didn't really work out.
Right. There's no chance this happens.
Why not?
There's absolutely no chance.
Why
this
not,
happens.
Taylor Rockwell?
You know why?
Why is that?
Because we've already mentioned all of the reasons, and I'm not saying it wouldn't be a good idea. I'm saying there's no chance it happens because it's his son. And Bob Bradley does not have the reputation coming in and the backing of the fans coming in to do what he wants.
Yeah.
And the idea of an American manager
nepotism.
who's Americans never managed in the Premier League, for him to come in with a resume that maybe people are already sort of like French second division in Norway, okay.
Nearly qualified for the World Cup with Egypt, nearly qualified to Ligue 1 with Le Havre, nearly won the Norwegian League with Stuyberg.
Yeah, to be like, oh, really? And now you're hiring your son? Great. And then, as you said, in an era of kind of like questionable ethics and corruption probes, the idea of American manager signs son as first signing, not great. Not great headlines.
You're right. Okay.
So it probably won't happen for that very reason.
That's good realism there.
Which makes me sad.
From Taylor Rockwell. Okay. Sticking in the Premier League, we're going to talk Spurs, Man City. Tottenham beat Man City 2-0 on Sunday morning. This segment is sponsored by the fine people at Mack Weldon. Mack Weldon make men's apparel that is better than what you're wearing right now, unless, Taylor Rockwell, you're wearing any Mack Weldon today.
I don't believe I am.
You're not today?
I was wearing it yesterday and the day before. Different pieces, not just the same one over and over and over again.
I was wearing my green crew neck T-shirt yesterday.
Oh, very nice. Let's talk more about what we were wearing.
It was better than what I'm wearing right now.
Well, that's obvious.
So Mack Weldon are sponsoring this Premier League segment of today's show. Spurs 2-0 win over Man City. They remain the only unbeaten team in the Premier League, but they're not top. Man City are top.
They are not.
Let's talk about how this happened, because it was it felt like an undoing of Manchester City.
And the way I think I'm going to choose to explain this is the scene from Crocodile Dundee when the guy
not what I was expecting.
When the guy has a knife and then Crocodile Dundee pulls out a knife and is like, "That's not a knife. This is a knife," and pulls out a bigger knife. I like to think that Pochettino was like, "That's not a press. This is a press." And away they went.
I kind of love that analogy, but it's not quite right.
No.
Because it's more like Tottenham had a smaller knife, but just used it
more effectively,
more cleverly and effectively.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Sure.
So the way I saw it is, instead of like full-on pressing Manchester City and getting your ass passed around, to me, it's like Tottenham waited until they would hold halfway mostly. They'd wait until the ball went back to Claudio Bravo, and then like that was the trigger. And then you would see like Son Heung-min would go after Claudio Bravo, then you'd see Dele Alli come, and then you'd see Eriksen come, and you'd see Lamela come. That would be like everyone swarm. And then all of a sudden, Man City are in the worst possible spot to be pressed.
It's a really strange thing that I have never really seen before that I can think of, which is that Man City so publicly went for a new goalkeeper, right? Because Joe Hart can't play with his feet, according to Pep Guardiola, and they need a goalkeeper who can. And it almost seems like this thing where you get, like, they got the player they wanted in the form of Claudio Bravo, who can do exactly what they want. Yeah. And so it's supposed to be this idea that, like, they've got the guy they need, they've strengthened there. And instead it's become like, wait, you have explained exactly what you want to do from a tactics standpoint. Right. Then we're going to use that to our advantage. And so you're right. Literally, and I didn't catch it at the time, it was when you pointed out, we went back and watched. Every single time he gets the ball, he's under some sort of pressure, or his options are taken away, and then he's under pressure. I mean, he keeps kicking it out of bounds. He keeps kicking it long, and it's because of what Tottenham were doing.
It's as if Achilles took out an ad about his heel. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's like, I don't even know, because even then, it's like he would still have to advertise as like something that he didn't really need. I don't know, but in the end, it wouldn't work very well. It's
the only point I'm vulnerable.
Yeah, right.
But and the thing is, it's not as if they pressed Claudio Bravo because we can get the ball off him. Yeah. It's more that we know that Claudio Bravo, when he has the ball at his feet, is going to look to his left back and his right back, right? So then they would know that he was going to pass it to Kolarov, even if there are like two people charging Kolarov, and then they go after Kolarov. You know what I mean? And so that's how the first goal comes about. Not Kolarov, it's the other side, right? They the ball goes back to Bravo. They all press. They manage to squeeze it out to Zabaleta. Zabaleta squeezes it to Fernandinho, but then Wanyama gets Fernandinho.
Wanyama is Fernandinho.
He does. Yeah. And then the ball quickly goes out wide. Danny Rose whips it in. Kolarov own goal.
And I have to say, I'm really curious now to go back. I wouldn't mind going back and watching that Swansea game that you mentioned to see if maybe Swansea attacked down that left wing and played those like low-driven balls in, because we saw in the Champions League last week, Celtic, that goal comes about, the Dembele overhead kick goal, the third goal Celtic had. It comes about from a whipped-in ball from the left wing that Kolarov fails to deal with correctly, and it falls to Dembele. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was very similar, except this time, instead of playing it to a Spurs player to bike home, he just put it in the back of net himself. Just trying to be a little more efficient, I guess.
Skip the middleman.
Yeah. So it makes me wonder if maybe that was something that they had identified as a weakness. But even if it wasn't, they had absolutely identified the passing to the outside backs and trying to build from the back as an absolute weakness.
Yeah, that we can definitely get them here, right? And then the other thing I think Spurs did is They didn't have Harry Kane up front because of injury. They did have Son Heung-min, and they knew he was fast. So they would just feed the ball into him. There were some very direct balls from Tottenham to keep stretching Manchester City. So there was either the ball out to Danny Rose, who seemed like, I don't know if it's just because of where the camera was, or just Danny Rose on the ball all the time in this game.
Yeah.
And he would whip it in, or they would just put it in the channel and Son would get there first.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it really felt, and I feel like we've heard this criticism a long time ago about Pep Guardiola, that he makes his teams stick with the plan regardless of what's happening.
Right.
And so it did feel like Tottenham just knew he was never going to say, Bravo, just kick it long. Like, we'll deal with this later. Instead, it felt like every single time Bravo was like, this is a bad idea, but this is what I have to do. So maybe I'll take an extra touch and try to create that. Oh, that didn't work. Now I'm under more pressure. Like, it just felt like they were kind of stuck in doing what they've been instructed to do, and otherwise they'll get yelled at.
I wonder how much does Bravo love doing that, and how much is it like, well, Pep says, I got to do this.
I think it's probably mostly that he likes doing it, because he definitely gets a little bit creative, if you want to go that route, or crazy, if you want to go the other route on the ball at times.
I know this as well. Graham Lasseau picked this up, that it's not as if Bravo is under pressure so much himself. It's more that he passes to players who are already under pressure. And he's kind of like, well, I did my job.
Yeah, exactly.
Good luck, Kolarov.
It's like when the football player is like carrying the ball and he knows he's about to get smashed and just laterals it to the guy next to him, and it's like, good luck with that. Have fun. Not my fault.
It's exactly what
I didn't have the ball. Yeah.
I guess we should talk about Tottenham's second goal as well, because that was kind of a beauty from Dele Alli.
I mean, it's the same thing, right? I mean, it's transition quickly, it's get the ball forward, it's move.
Yeah, it does start with pressure on Claudio Bravo, then he puts it out to a fullback, then there's pressure on the fullback, and then I think possession changes maybe like 5 times. So I suppose I'm doing a lot of clicking on this podcast.
It's all good.
If anyone's getting annoyed, I'm going to stop clicking right now. Possession does go back and forth.
I bet money you click within the next 5 minutes.
It does go back and forth quite a few times. My hands are flat on the table.
They sure are.
And eventually it looks like Man City have got it back and they're on the break, right? But I think it's definitely Lamela, and I think it's Danny Rose.
I believe you are correct.
Chase, and eventually hassle the ball loose from Silva, who's not an easy man to hassle the ball loose from. And then they break, and it ends up with a It's 3 against 5, and they still break through. It's Dele Alli, it's Son Heung-min, and I think it's Eric Lamela as well. How's he in midfield and then up front?
He's fast.
That's Eric Lamela for you.
Yep. And it's and even then it's like a bad pass from Dele Alli, but they have so many numbers moving forward at such pace that basically Son is able to collect it. Dele Alli regains his composure, makes a very smart run through the defense, is onside, finishes well. But I want to talk about that breakup play that you mentioned where Lamela and Rose win the ball back, because I think, again, this game showed how much preparation Pochettino did, and it's sort of, I wondered this weekend about what it's like to be a manager and just sort of be like, man, I hope this is what they do because this is what we've planned, and when they actually do exactly what you wanted them to do, how good that has to feel, because it seems like Pochettino was fully aware that Guardiola likes to send numbers into the middle, either as his wingers or his fullbacks, to kind of give you...
The first 3 weeks of the season we talked about Kolarov and Zabaleta coming inside and playing like extra midfielders,
right? And it seems like if you're forcing those fullbacks under pressure, then they're not going to be able to have the time on the ball to drift in. And you're not going to let Man City have the possession necessarily that allows them to come inside. So then it necessitates the wingers coming inside and helping out.
Is that why I kept seeing Jesus Navas in the centre circle?
I think so, and that's why on that break, I mean, City break, and Silva basically has no one to play to because Jesus Navas has to make a run from behind David Silva to get into a support position. Whereas if he's out wide to start, that ball can be played through, and all of a sudden, Jesus Navas is in on goal.
Is that a case of like overthinking things?
How do you mean?
Maybe Jesus Navas should have just played as a winger who offers width.
I mean, we've heard that criticism. We've had that criticism of Guardiola before, right? That he can overcomplicate in big games, and it seems like that's sort of what happened here. And then I think it was really smart as well that Tottenham's game plan seemed to be, as soon as we win that ball back, get it up the field. It's quick, but it's not like just hoof it up the field. It's quick 20 to 30-yard passes that are all designed to move the ball from A to B as fast as possible, and then you can slow it down.
I'm sure it's more complicated than this, but it does seem like Son Heung-min is fast but not tall. So let's get it forward quickly on the ground.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
I know that's overly simplified, but it's basically what they were doing. It just kept Man City always chasing. And even when Son didn't get there, then Stones would collect it, and there'd be enough pressure that you had to go back to Bravo, and then the press happens. It's kind of a genius master plan from Pochettino.
I like it. And with that, I want to say that Son is my player of the match.
Oh, Mack Weldon, player of the match here? Okay, you've gone with Son.
Yeah.
All right, please explain why.
I think, number one, for narrative. I'm a sucker for narrative. And he was a guy who was on the outs, seemed like he wasn't going to get any playing time.
Yeah.
I think agitated for either a new contract or a move. And I think got neither, but Pochettino was sort of like, you can prove yourself, and that's exactly what he's done, to the point where now he's starting, and I have to wonder, maybe not Janssen, maybe not Kane, maybe they're totally fine where they are, but you have to wonder if there's this really mobile, fast guy who's creating and scoring goals if you're a little bit nervous, because Son executed exactly what he was told to do, clearly, and created opportunities all over the pitch.
I saw Vincent Janssen came in and played maybe 2 minutes, which I'm sure he wasn't thrilled about.
Probably not.
What happened if Harry Kane had been fit for this?
I don't know if you can execute this game plan as much.
Do you think maybe Pochettino's like, well, this time, Harry, it's more of a Son Heung-min kind of day?
Maybe. I mean, or maybe you just adjust your tactics a little bit and you like blend Harry Kane in as a result. But
you can't play those fast balls for Harry to chase, right? Stones is going to just beat him like double the speed every time.
Yeah, it doesn't work quite so well there. You play into his big head and hope that something happens.
Right, yeah. So your Mack Weldon player of the game is Son Heung-min. I'm going to go with Eric Lamela. It had to be a Tottenham player, right?
Yeah.
But Lamela for his work rate, because I never really thought of him as a sort of hustle back and win the ball, but he absolutely did on that second goal. But also for his quick passing in tight spaces. Do you remember the one sequence we were looking at regularly?
Yep.
Because we couldn't figure out almost how he did it, where they played it into Lamela and he sort of quickly one-timed it outside to Danny Rose. So it's the way that he could do the quick passes. You're looking at me strangely. Have I clicked?
You've forgotten something.
What have I forgotten?
That Eric Lamela missed the penalty.
That's fine. I'm going to let him get away with it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the rest of his performance, to me, doesn't matter if he missed the penalty kick.
Did you forget that, though?
I did forget
that. I thought so.
I'm sticking with it. I've said it. I'm sticking with it.
Honestly, I thought about Eric Lamela, too, for the reasons you mentioned.
Yeah.
And for that work rate. And then I was like, I don't know if you can miss a penalty that you didn't earn and then still get it.
For the casual viewer, he prolonged the drama of the game by not making it 3-0 in the second half.
Yeah, that's what it was. Sure.
So
he's also a big fan of the narrative. Yeah.
Lamela is my Mack Weldon player of the game. If he would like to collect his prize, Lamela or Son Heung-min could go to mackweldon.com. Where they can peruse all of Mack Weldon's fine clothes, and they can use discount code TSS for Total Soccer Show, TSS, to get 20% off their first purchase.
Right.
Either of them could do it.
Oh, that's nice of you. That's nice of you to be so generous. Yeah, and that's on, T-shirts, hoodies, sweatpants, underwear, antimicrobial Silverline underwear, socks, polos, so many things. So many different things that they could use.
It's getting towards hoodie season.
It is. I'm so excited. See, except that I keep saying that, and then it keeps not being hoodie season.
Right.
So
that's because you live
move it along, fall.
Because you live in Richmond, Virginia.
There is that.
Thank you to Mack Weldon for sponsoring today's Premier League coverage. The link is in the show notes as well as the discount code. Mm-hmm. Another goalkeeper having some trouble with his feet.
It was a weird weekend.
It was a
weird
weird
all
weekend.
Interrelated.
Was Ter Stegen at Barcelona, who lost 4-3 to Celta Vigo, and it was kind of pretty much his fault.
I mean, it depends on how you want to look at that. Because, yes, obviously...
it was the killer goal, right? Because Barcelona were mounting a comeback.
This is true. Yeah, the fourth goal. I mean, the first goal, it's not a great pass into Busquets.
Is that Ter Stegen into midfield?
Yeah. He basically bypasses the center backs, tries to get it to Busquets. It's a couple yards away from him, and it ends up being intercepted. They come right back down and score.
I know who scores as well.
Pionicisto.
Yeah, is he in the scouting reports today?
He is not.
Oh, okay.
But he may well have, but his scouter may have emailed while this show is happening.
Okay, so we didn't get the scouting report. We're expecting it any minute. But basically, TSS Scouting Network, Scoutee Pionicisto scored the opening goal in this game.
It's a good finish. It was a Messi-esque finish in the sense that he has a very tight angle, and he kind of he doesn't shoot like normally. He kind of stops his foot, but it's still side netting on the low dribbling, insulting goal.
And it gets to 3-0, right, to Celta Vigo. Barcelona mount a comeback, and then it's 3-2. And Ter Stegen has the ball at his feet, tries to cleverly chip it out left. Instead, he chips it directly into the head of Pablo Hernandez, who just buries it past him to make it 4-2.
I mean, I'm not sure he necessarily means to bury it, but the power of the chip from Ter Stegen means he buries it. Yeah,
it's a good cross.
Yes.
But what is Ter Stegen doing? That's the big question, right? I know that teams like to play at the back. I know that especially a Barcelona keeper likes to play at the back. But there's passing it along the floor to a fullback who's maybe going to be under pressure, which is still not great. It's what Claudio Bravo did. And then there's chipping it directly into an opposition striker who's maybe 10 yards away from you. What's that all about?
I think maybe just thinking I play for Barcelona, I can get away with this. Because that's what he's doing. He's trying to be clever, and sort of the attacker's running in. He's thinking I can sucker him in and then just chip it a little bit over him into my defender. My defender can now go because the attacker's too far forward.
So he's just trying to get it over his head or over his shoulder?
Yeah, he's absolutely trying to be cheeky and chip him. But it's it's not so much just I'm doing this just because I can. There is definitely intent behind it in allowing a counter to occur. It's just also a very poorly executed pass at a very poorly thought out time.
Oh, we've got to talk about this whole goalkeeper playing with their feet thing. I'm starting to feel very traditionalist in that I'm starting to think maybe it's just a bad idea. Just sometimes turn away from trouble, kick it upfield, do what Joe Hart would have done.
Yeah, it's tough though, because then if it's your stated objective and it's how your entire game plan is built, so then if you just intermittently hoof it, you know that you're not going to be doing what you want to try to be doing.
But shouldn't your stated objective always have the asterisk of
don't kick the ball into a player's face and have it go in the goal? Yeah, probably.
Well, the asterisk should be if advisable. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Just because you don't do it one time doesn't mean you failed. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but Ter Stegen can now ruminate on that as he has flashbacks to the ball slowly rolling off the post and going in, and him just having no ability to stop it.
So there was sort of a consolation goal, it turned out to be, I think from PK. It finished Celta Vigo 4, Barcelona 3. Barcelona are 4th in La Liga. Messi may be on the comeback trail, though. We may get Messi back for Man City Barcelona at the Champions League. We shall see.
We could, but that gap didn't increase too much because Real Madrid drew with Eibar 1-1, meaning that La Liga remains wide open. It's
Atletico dominated.
There we go.
Another team we're keeping an eye on, obviously, Christian Pulisic. He got the start for Borussia Dortmund against Bayer Leverkusen.
And then got the hook.
At half-time. This was a super interesting game. Tactically. I want to say the most tactically interesting of the weekend. It was Roger Schmidt versus Thomas Tuchel. It ended 2-0 to Leverkusen with a goal from Chicharito.
Indeed.
So he essentially wins the USA-Mexico derby in the Bundesliga.
Yeah, he did. He definitely did. Single-handedly, since there were other Americans in there.
And he won it 2-0.
Yep.
He could say, 2-0.
Yes. Did you research that? Or did you just know that off the top of your head?
Someone else tweeted that.
There we go.
Who it was. But I did know. I know German numbers.
The reason why I say all these games feel connected to me is because obviously there were some goalkeeper mishaps in the two games we've already talked about. And in this one, it felt similar to Pochettino getting his tactics exactly right.
Yeah.
It felt like Leverkusen came out and were prepared for everything Dortmund was going to do, which is surprising because Dortmund did some innovative things for them, and still just completely shut them down.
Yeah, and in a way that really didn't benefit Christian Pulisic.
Not at all.
So to give some background on this, we read the Spielverlagerung website, their tactical analysis of the game. And honestly, it's so complicated that I had trouble understanding exactly what they were talking about. But then we watched the game, and then it all makes sense.
It did.
Right? You could sort of see what was going on, which was that Bayer Leverkusen, I think you had the good analogy of Bayer Leverkusen set up a barricade.
Blockade, yeah.
A blockade, yeah. So that when Borussia defenders tried to bring the ball out of the back, they had no options. They didn't press the defenders. They just blocked off all possible avenues into midfield.
Right. It seemed like basically Dortmund had set out with their usual wide midfielders, Christian Pulisic and Dembele in this game, with the idea that they could push forward and keep the Leverkusen outside backs back, right?
Yeah.
But what kept happening is that Pulisic and Dembele were then basically caught and had to keep drifting back and back and back because there was no avenue or outlet for a pass from the Dortmund back line.
It's partly because Tuchel had gone with a back three, right? He'd gone with no full-backs and he'd moved Guerrero back into midfield. So they had just three centre-backs, weirdly, with Piszczek coming across to join. I don't think that worked out at all.
No, because I probably wouldn't have picked up on it live if we hadn't have read that article after the fact and then watched it.
Yeah.
But it felt as a neutral, I guess leaning towards Dortmund because of Pulisic.
Yeah.
It felt suffocating to watch because they could not do anything. It was just move the ball on the back because there wasn't that much aggressive pressure on that back three. Yep. It was just sort of like, you guys can have the ball, but you're not getting it anywhere.
You can have it, you just can't do anything with it.
And so it would just be like pass.
It's like having a locked phone.
yeah. It would just be like pass, kick it long.
Yep.
And out of frustration, not out of pressure.
So they would kick it long looking for Aubameyang and it wouldn't get to him. Or they would go wide to Pulisic or wide to Dembele. And I think the part we're interested in is when it goes wide to Pulisic on the right.
Yep.
Then Leverkusen would do this thing where two men would come and swarm him and surround him and he had nowhere to go.
Right. And so either he would kind of play the safe pass and drop it back and then the cycle repeats itself, or a couple different times he would try to turn and make something happen and then he would get dispossessed. Now, he then worked very hard to win the ball back and sometimes did, but it's still getting dispossessed usually around midfield, which is not ideal.
And then he got subbed out at half-time for Turkish youngster Emre Mor.
Right.
So we should talk about this because I know a lot of people maybe didn't read the Spielverlagerung article and pay attention to all the tactical details, just saw Pulisic started, Pulisic subbed out. And I want to try and get a read on what we think. I'm not sure. We haven't talked about this much off air. How much of it is Pulisic's fault for a bad performance? How much of it is just Tuchel saying, let's rethink this whole thing? What do you think the Pulisic's exit was all about?
I would honestly say it's more about his performance.
You would? Okay.
And in a number of different ways there. But because the thing when I saw that Pulisic had come out at halftime, I also saw that Castro came out at halftime.
Yeah.
Castro, who's an attacker, comes off. Schmelzer, who's a defender, comes on. So you see there that it's like, okay, we're going away from this back three. We're going to a back four.
Yeah. And they'd switched the actual formation during the first half, but I think this was we're going to do it with the right personnel as well.
Right.
Because they did have to abandon the back three after 12 minutes.
Yeah, because it just wasn't working at all. And so that's a tactical change. Christian Pulisic off, Emre Mor on, it's kind of a like-for-like substitution. And so with that, I think that points to maybe he either wasn't playing very well, but my guess would be more so that he wasn't capable of adjusting once that tactical shift occurred from the back three to a 4-3-3, essentially.
Yeah.
And because he was on the far side of where Tuchel couldn't really talk him through it, I feel like maybe they took the time during the first half to talk Emre Mor through, kind of get him ready, and then put him on to execute the new game plan.
We had this from the TSS Scouting Network, right? That Tuchel likes to have the young players to be on his side where Tuchel is, so he can talk to them on the wing, right? So, the second half, I've got this right in my head, I may have this wrong, Moore would be on Tuchel's side of the field, so he can talk him. Okay.
Yeah, and then I think also, if you look at their style of play, I think I said this to you before we started recording, that it's a little bit like Christian Pulisic is Christian Pulisic, and then Emre Mor is like a way better Freddie Adu. That he seems very talented on the ball, very silky, very, very skillful, but the big criticism of Freddie Adu was always that he didn't quite know how to play in a system. That when it was incumbent upon him to execute the game plan, he would try to do keepy-ups, or he would try to do step-overs and get stuck and lose the ball. And Emre Mor is definitely not, it's not to that degree.
Yeah, because he wouldn't be playing for Dortmund otherwise. But I get what you're saying.
But it does seem like he's the one to come in and freestyle and do step-overs and go at people when you have two people pressuring you, as opposed to playing the safe ball back.
Because we did see him as well, the start of the second half. Leverkusen did that thing where the ball went out to Emre Mor. They did that double defender on the wing thing where they squeeze you sideways. And Mor did wiggle between them, right? He did a bit of a hip swivel, got through, eventually got tackled. But he did that thing that I think Pulisic would not have done. Right. Pulisic's more about the move and accelerate or the smart play it backwards ball. He's not so much about the crazy hip swivel.
Right. And there's definitely a funny thing that can happen in a game where you're doing everything simple, you're doing everything like, I'm not losing the ball, I'm making the simple pass, I'm dropping it back. And that can feel like you're playing a good game, but it's not what you need, right? And then if at the end of the game, if you're a forward and all you're doing is passing and passing and passing and dropping it back to the outside back, it's great that you have 95% pass completion. You have 0 shots on target. And I think it might be the similar thing where Pulisic was doing the safe thing, but maybe not executing an aggressive game plan to get a positive result.
And 1-0 down, they needed the switcher. So maybe here we sort of found some delineation between Pulisic and Mor and their skill sets.
I'm okay with saying so, even if we definitely haven't. Even if it's just rampant speculation.
Well, we've at least speculated on a difference between what they do, right? Like maybe Mor is a little more creative, whereas Pulisic is more able to exploit space when he gets it, as he did with Danilo.
There we go. I like it.
And for the record, again, it finished 2-0 to Leverkusen. That's kind of a blow to Dortmund's title chase.
It is. It is indeed.
Good news for Pulisic, though. He was in Jurgen Klinsmann's US national team roster.
Yeah, it was.
So 23-man roster was named for the games against Cuba and New Zealand. It has now been not quite decimated. It's been reduced to 22 because of an Alejandro Bedoya rib muscle injury. Rib muscle strain is what I read.
Yep.
So, it's just 22 people right now. I'll say this. It is an interesting roster.
Yeah.
It's not the strongest roster that Klinsmann could have picked deliberately, right? Because there's no Tim Howard, there's no Brad Gazan. But it's also not like a Camp Cupcake type thing. It's a weird in-between.
Yeah. It's not the under 10, though, that we were looking for. The under 10 caps that I had proposed. But
it's not my Pace Hounds 11 that I was looking for.
No, not
Pace
so much.
In your face.
It is an exciting, a different, unique selection. Almost exciting enough to get me to be excited about these two games.
Really? Against Cuba on Friday and New Zealand at home on Tuesday.
I am not the only one. I think Stephen Goff from the Washington Post tweeted out that, not surprisingly, an international friendly against New Zealand on a Tuesday night is not selling that many tickets in DC.
RFK, right?
And it's at RFK. Yeah. It's not doing great in terms of sales.
Well, tickets are available.
Tickets are available. Go to SeatGeek for all your ticket needs. I'll throw in them, too.
Shall we talk about maybe what stands out on this roster then?
Sure.
So for me, it's obviously the goalkeepers. David Bingham, Ethan Horvath, and William Yarbrough. All of them relatively inexperienced. Yep. I think the guy I'm most excited to see is Ethan Horvath, because I remember him from those U23 games against Colombia. I think he came off injured, but he was magnificent when he was in there.
Yeah, I'm excited to see William Yarbrough as well, just because we only saw him in bits and pieces here and there, and then we've heard so much about how his form has fallen off, and now he's the third choice at Club Leon or wherever he was.
That doesn't make me so excited.
Yeah, so just to see that, he's clearly done something to justify a recall, so that's pretty good. The one that I think most people are very excited about, the one we've been hearing a lot about, is Lyden Gooch, the Sunderland winger.
First call up to the senior national team. Yeah, Lyden Gooch is listed among the midfielders. We're thinking he was out of favour a little bit at Sunderland. He's back in. They're still losing all the time and bottom of the Premier League. But he could be a new option at sort of defensive midfield or deep midfield for Klinsmann for the US national team. But I thought the same about Caleb Stanko, who got a run out in the last game.
That's weird, because I think of him, I guess maybe I just haven't watched enough Sunderland. I think of him more as an attacking player, which is why he has very minimal touches and passes.
He was with the U23s, but the few games I've seen him play for Sunderland, he played sort of left-sided defensive, and he's played central holding defensive midfield. Yeah.
All right.
So I think that's where we'll see him deployed for the United States.
Well, it's Jurgen Klinsmann, so he might be a right back. We'll see.
And we've also got Perry Kitchen in there, the new Hearts of Midlothian captain.
Yeah.
Remember that? And Danny Williams. So it seems to me that there's a sort of a tryout for defensive midfielder with the absence of Kyle Beckerman. So that is that kind of roster where it's like, all right, I know what Kyle Beckerman can do. I'm probably going to select him against Mexico November 11th and Costa Rica the game after in the Hex, right? You know that's going to happen. Carl Beckerman's trusted he's going to be in there. But in the meantime, this is my chance to experiment a little, see what Gooch, Kitchen, and Williams can bring to that role.
Yep.
Agree? That's what's going on here?
Yeah. And I think you will see maybe them play together, just to see what they can offer you in like a 4-2-3-1 or two defensive midfielder situation. I'm also pretty excited to see the aforementioned Christian Pulisic back in that roster. Not seeing Darlington Nagbe is kind of a bummer, but he was excluded for personal/family reasons.
Well, that's not the official line.
Okay.
As far as we know, he's just excluded. But Brian Sciaretta, who you really can trust when it comes to reporting, says that personal/family reasons are the reason Nagbe is not included. With Bedoya dropping out, there is a spot in this roster for a more experienced player. So we don't know if he'll be replaced or if he will not be replaced.
Right.
I'd like to see Kellyn Acosta get back in here. For me, he falls in that thing of not massively experienced, but got a few caps. Yep. So this is still even a trip to Cuba, which won't be necessarily a particularly demanding game. It's half a diplomatic mission, right?
Yeah.
It is half a diplomatic mission. Even that is good international experience for Kellyn Acosta. I'd like to see him back on this roster.
Right. And you may well see that, or you may see Klinsmann just stick with 22. We shall see.
Yeah.
We shall see. With Nagbe, though, I think what we've heard, some rumors that maybe it was has some injuries that they're worried about. Maybe it's that Portland want to save him and have asked Klinsmann not to call him in preparation for the playoffs.
Yeah.
There's some other players on the roster who might be the same. Tim Howard, right? Colorado have a game during this break.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why Tim Howard not included.
So there is an international break.
Right.
But weirdly, Colorado and Houston are playing that weekend. It must be like an MLS sort of, we need to get this game scheduled kind of game. So that's the reason for Tim Howard.
And then Seattle are playing, Wednesday? Is that right?
Yeah, so the day after the New Zealand game, Seattle plays against Houston also.
Again.
So I would expect maybe to see more of Jordan Morris in the Cuba game.
Yep.
And maybe he doesn't make the trip to RFK for the New Zealand game. That would make sense.
That would make sense.
Unless Jurgen Klinsmann has no respect for Brian Schmetzer.
Also that.
We'll see what happens. Julian Green also on this roster.
Yeah, he is.
That's odd, right? Hasn't really played for Bayern Munich. I think he got some minutes in the early rounds of the Cup game for Bayern Munich, but he's mostly been on the bench or not been on the bench.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That sums it up.
Don't you think that makes the recall kind of odd?
I mean, maybe you're trying to get his confidence up. Maybe you're trying to remind Bayern that he can do things.
How long are we going to do this for? This has been like 2.5 years of doing exactly that.
What is he, 21, 23? He's still pretty young, man.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we'll do it for a while. And it kind of makes sense if you go with that Klinsmann precedent of bringing in players to kind of showcase them or give them some minutes so that people are reminded they're a national team player. So maybe you bring him in against weak opposition and get Julian Green a goal or two, and then suddenly Bayern Munich are like, oh yeah, he's scoring goals for the U.S. national team. Let's give it a chance. Let's see what happens.
Oh yeah, actually maybe with Morris leaving. Well, that's not official, by the way. That's what we're assuming. Yeah. Maybe that's the game where you see Julian Green get some serious minutes against New Zealand at RFK. Chris Wondolowski also on the roster. I'll bring this up just because I've seen so many people sort of complain about it because they say they're sort of sick of seeing him.
Yep.
But in this situation, there are so many young guys as well, like Jordan Morris, Bobby Wood, Julian Green, Josie Altidore, not young, but obviously great to see him. He's not taking minutes away from anyone here. And I think there's that thing of him being a good locker room presence, right? When there's like, Dempsey's not there, so you're missing a veteran. Beckerman's not there, so you're missing a veteran. Howard and Guzan the same. Maybe Wondolowski's here just because he's a guy that Klinsmann trusts in practice, in the locker room, to bring sort of a positive attitude to the whole affair.
What if, like, the first time Wondolowski met Klinsmann, he just made a comment that made Klinsmann laugh? And from then on, he's like, this is the funny guy. Every roster from now on, he's in there. I don't care if he misses.
Cut the jokes.
Miss score, have your jersey misspelled, you're in the roster no matter what.
But I read an article by Will Parchman, a writer we really like. He's been on the show a few times. Essentially talking about exactly that Klinsmann likes to have certain guys for the personality mix. That Wondolowski, I'm deliberately not clicking.
You've quit snapping and now you've done finger guns.
Yeah, finger guns. Pew, pew. That maybe that's the reason Wondolowski's there all the time. So maybe don't rip your hair out every time you see Wondolowski on a roster. There are intangible reasons why he's there.
And then the thing I think that you were most excited about, if I recall correctly, was DeAndre Yedlin being included as a defender. So more DeAndre Yedlin, a right back for you?
I mean, I'd rather see him play right back than right wing. Put it that way.
Yeah.
Right? I'd rather see Kellyn Acosta play either, but...
Truth.
But yeah, a week ago.
Great.
Yeah, past midweek.
Moving on.
If you want to move on... Okay, so those games Friday night. Friday, 4 o'clock Eastern, US Cuba. Then the following Tuesday, US plays New Zealand. We'll do a full preview and review of both games. Also, coming up, England, without Sam Allardyce, Gareth Southgate now in charge. Southgate has selected his first roster, and it's funny looking. It is, it's funny looking. Like Steve Buscemi in Fargo.
Explain why. Not the Steve Buscemi part, the roster part.
Very few central midfielders. So Jordan Henderson, Dele Alli, Eric Dyer. are the only 3 players who I think of as central midfielders who are on the England roster that Southgate selected.
Well, you got Wayne Rooney in there, so that's another good central midfielder.
That looks like what might be happening.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe Oxlade-Chamberlain. I know that's where he prefers to play. Mm-hmm. He was involved in a very interesting goal for Arsenal this week.
He was.
Do you want to talk about this a little bit? Because we've got some tweets asking us what we think of this goal.
Sure.
So Arsenal win late against Burnley.
Mm-hmm.
It's Arsene Wenger's 20 years in charge, and they win 1-0 with the most un-Arsene Wenger goal, I'm going to say, of all time.
Right.
It's we figured out it's an offside handball goal.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because basically it's 93rd minute, ball comes in, it's flicked on by, I believe, Theo Walcott, and at the time that he flicks the ball on, both Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain and Laurent Koscielny are onside.
Yep.
But no one really marks them because everyone assumes they're offside. So then it falls to Oxlade-Chamberlain, it seems like, who, there's one of 2 narratives, I guess. Either he shoots it and it hits off of Laurent Koscielny and goes in the goal.
That's what I think happened.
In which case, Koscielny should be offside.
And it's a handball.
It's a handball, yeah. Or it doesn't hit him, or I don't know, it's very confusing. Or, excuse me, it doesn't hit Chamberlain, it hits Koscielny. Koscielny then plays into himself, and even then it's still a handball.
Yeah.
So it does seem like it should have been a disallowed goal one way or the other.
But happy 20th, I guess.
Yes,
Arsene Wenger.
yeah.
Maybe he's had so many games frustrated of watching pass, not win.
Yeah.
The universe owes him one.
Yeah.
So he gets this 1-0 win against Burnley for 20 years, long service. Mm-hmm. And I bring this up not only to talk about that goal, because it was an interesting goal, but also to talk about the rumours. Are they rumours?
I really think it's going to happen. I am now firmly on board this idea.
Gareth Southgate. Bear in mind, these are World Cup qualifiers, right? And England were in no rush to replace Sam Allardyce. Mm-hmm. Southgate stepped up temporarily.
Yep.
There's a theory, a conspiracy theory maybe, that Southgate is just keeping the seat warm until the summer when Arsene Wenger's Arsenal contract expires and then he steps into the England job.
Yep.
From 2017 to the 2018 World Cup.
Yeah, and I hadn't read much of these rumors, but it's something that I was like slowly like, oh no. Oh, this is definitely going to happen. Oh, it's definitely going to happen.
Why, oh no? Do you think it's a bad thing?
I think of all of the other stuff that goes in with that about how annoying the press are going to be and how there's going to be so much speculation because that's what it's going to be. I mean, it does
because it'll be secret until the day before.
Secret-ish, but it fits kind of the narrative, not even the narrative, but it just kind of checks the boxes, right? Of like, why would you give Southgate so many games in charge over such a long period? Other than because you have someone who's currently employed, but who will be out of contract at the end of the season.
And because you arrogantly assume that with an interim manager, you can just coast through World Cup qualifying, right? We have that win away to Slovakia in the bag. We have a home game against Malta, which honestly, I could probably coach England and they'd win that game. But then we have away to Slovenia as part of this international break. That's not an easy game.
Yeah, no, it's not. But I mean, it's still, relatively speaking, a game that England should win. And should be okay with, as is the Malta game. So I think you can maybe afford to do that, especially given the dearth of available candidates.
Ask me again next week then.
I will. But in the meantime, I do think that unless something goes horribly wrong for Arsenal or they win the title this season, that is kind of the best of both worlds for everyone involved. Because I think Wenger maybe is ready to move on to a different position. I think, as we've heard, like with Jose Mourinho, for example, why he didn't want the England job, because basically he was like, I'm not old enough yet. Like, it seems like
it's too part-time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And think maybe like Wenger moves into that position. Maybe it's also a position that like he's kind of been around a lot because he's been in England for so long, and so it becomes a thing that he's looked forward to for Arsenal fans. It's a kind of a happy goodbye as opposed to like going into retirement, we'll figure something else out. Yeah. It's like going into retirement
like a victory lap
with England where we'll still get to see you while we bring in a new manager.
I would say I kind of like it as well because I'm not someone who's necessarily against the idea of a big-name foreign coach taking over England, but it's been weird to me that the 2 times England's done it, they've hired foreign coaches that had never worked in England. Isn't that really odd? Like, Sven came in from outside.
Thank you. I've completely blanked on Sven.
Most of his reputation is built with Lazio in Serie A.
Yeah.
And then Fabio Capello comes in from the outside, never coached in England. Yeah. It's really odd to me. Like, if you're going to appoint a foreign coach, you may as well appoint one of the many, many, many foreign coaches that have had careers in England.
Yeah.
Right? And Arsene Wenger is kind of a good choice in that sense.
And I think has the respect and certainly has the reputation to be able to come in and kind of command that locker room and institute the type of soccer he wants to play and drop people that he doesn't want to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, I'll say this for him. It's probably got to be a very exciting opportunity to get to play some of the players that he never could play at Arsenal. You know, it's like finally people who were adversaries are now my employees, and I can do with them as I choose.
All right, so there's England games that are coming up as well. It's Malta and it's away to Slovenia. Will keep an eye on them. I'd like to review them on the show if we've got time, Taylor. Over
sure.
This
I mean, I think the Malta game is going to deserve a lot of attention. It's going to be very tactical masterclass. I don't see how it could be boring at all.
Well, I hope there are lots of goals for us to review. So all that to come later in the week. Mm-hmm. One final thing on today's show. The Total Soccer Show Scouting Network.
Yes, sir.
Reports are coming in. We've actually got more reports than we've even got time to read on today's show. Some more reports will be added tomorrow. Mm-hmm. What's the latest in the world of exciting young players, Taylor?
Well, Pat Hardy sends one in, scouting Jason Denayer. Jason Denayer, the current Sunderland centre back and Belgium international. Denayer got the start at left back this past Saturday for Sunderland versus West Brom. He looked uncomfortable, almost like a centre back playing out of position.
This has been his whole life, the last 2 years.
After 20 minutes or so, he settled in and played a solid game at the back. He looked particularly good for the last 15 minutes when Sunderland went to a back three with Denayer on the left.
Well, yeah, Denayer's a little bit closer to home.
Exactly.
Now, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Pat Harty, for keeping tabs on Jason Denayer.
Yep.
Up next, Will Roberson is scouting Weston McKennie, the exciting young American who's over in Germany at, I believe, Schalke. Will says...
Read on and you'll find out.
Not only does Weston continue to be in the starting 11 for the Schalke under-19s, where he only recently signed, right? Mm-hmm. He was also named to the US under-20 men's national team 22-man roster for the upcoming Four Nations tournament featuring the US, England, Germany and the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that roster?
It's real strong, and it includes Isaiah Young. We spotted him.
We found him.
Yeah, although it still lists his club as PDA. So.
Right, which means no club, essentially, right?
Exactly.
But at least he is on that roster and exists. Also on that roster,
It's on the roster and exists.
Well, I mean, he was doubtful for a little while, right? Gideon Zelalem on that roster. Cameron Carter-Vickers on that roster. And the US is going up, I'm just going to read the list again, up against England, Germany and the Netherlands. Those could be some exciting games.
Yes.
We don't know where they're being streamed just yet. We'll try and find them. We'll let you know if we do.
Let's hope they're there. In the meantime, let's read a report from Kirsten Muladinha.
I already saw this in email. I'm excited to hear this one.
Scouting Brilembolo.
I believe this email was parenthesed enters beast mode.
Yeah, and he sure did.
Beast mode.
After playing what had to be his worst game for Schalke in the Europa League against RB Salzburg, Embolo started up top against Gladbach and registered 2 goals and an assist.
Go Brill!
On Thursday in that Europa League game, he was constantly out of position and forcing wingers to cut inside and make the runs that he should have been making. His first touch was awful, his passing was a mess, and he was constantly getting bullied off the ball. He looked like a completely different player on Sunday, and it seems like things are starting to come together for Schalke and Embolo.
So Kirsten put the videos, GIFs into the email. These are some good goals. It's one nutmeg. It's a shot nutmeg through a defender, a Mönchengladbach defender. And it's also a goal that is basically all muscle and hustle.
Yep.
Where he just keeps knocking people off the ball and winning it back all the way to goal.
Hence the beast mode.
Brill Embolo, yes.
Final report, Mr. Grove?
Comes from Cora Welsh, who is scouting Brooks Lennon, the 18-year-old American at Liverpool. So this is from September 23rd. Brooks Lennon played 18 minutes for Liverpool's under-23 team, who won 6-2 over Spurs in Premier League 2. In those 18 minutes, Lennon smashed the ball into the roof of the net.
He did.
So Brooks Lennon, has 18 years old, playing for the under-23s, has scored for Liverpool's under-23s. American. Do you know Brooks Lennon's dad's name?
John.
It is. There was a story, I saw a story in the Liverpool Echo about how John Lennon's son is playing for Liverpool. The most clickbaity headline I have ever seen.
Sure is.
Yeah.
It's right up there with Liverpool sign bent. Have you ever seen that one?
Yes.
And then it's just a sign that says Liverpool that's bent. Yeah.
Yep. But Brooks Lennon, worth keeping track of, especially in the Liverpool system.
You made it fancy at the end.
I did. If you would like to join the Total Soccer Show Scouting Network, you can do so at totalsoccershow.com/subscribe. When you do so, you help us support the show financially, you help us keep making the Total Soccer Show, and you help us create content and keep track of the most exciting young players in world soccer. I wonder if Ringo has a son that plays.
I don't know. I wonder if his name is Starkey or Star.
It should be Starkey. Right?
It should.
Streaky Starkey, if he wasn't a consistent performer. So totalsoccershow.com/subscribe is where you do that. Listeners, you'll notice I haven't clicked in like 45 minutes. I also want to encourage you to subscribe to The Goalmouth every day. Every morning, 7 a.m., you subscribe to the podcast, The Goalmouth. You'll get a rundown of all the day's news. Taylor, when's your Goalmouth day?
Thursday.
So Thursday is Taylor's Goalmouth day. Tuesday is Brooks Peck. Wednesday is George Qureshi. Friday is Ryan Bailey.
All of those sound correct.
Monday back to me. Taylor Rockwell, on behalf of me, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Right back at you, buddy.
Listeners, on behalf of Taylor and I, thank you for taking the time to listen to today's Total Soccer Show. We'll be back tomorrow with a rundown of all the domestic action. That is MLS, USL playoffs, NWSL semi-finals. Come back tomorrow to hear all of that.